Here we are again. This is going to be my 6th Halloween special. I was waiting for Netflix to release the most recent Frankenstein, directed by Guillermo del Toro. It is now out. I can now do my 11 greatest Frankenstein adaptations. Guillermo del Toro's film might make the list. I don't know. You're going to have to wait and see. And you're going to have to see where it makes the list. But these are my 11 greatest Frankenstein adapted films. If you are one of those people that fancies fables, fiction, film, tall tales, and high adventure, here we are in the right place. I'm Foxy Sellers. If you would, go ahead, subscribe to my channel. You'll get to see more of me. But today we're going to be covering the 11 greatest Frankenstein films. Okay, so Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or as some of you know it as the modern day Prometheus. Okay, so let's start with the rules. I didn't want to just include anything that could possibly be construed as a Frankenstein-type film story. So I am excluding things like The Munsters, of course, which is a TV show. He's not actually Frankenstein's monster. He is Herman Munster. So, of course, he doesn't count. Poor Things, that was a recent adaptation, doesn't count. Frankenhooker, Reanimator. But what would count would be, maybe Van Helsing, or even Blackenstein would count because the character in that was Dr. Stein, who creates his version of Frankenstein. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. All of these would count. So here are the two rules. The rules are it needs to be a character that was any one character, at least, that was adapted from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And it needs to be a live action adaptation. So naturally, Frankenweenie wouldn't count because that was, and that's a great movie, but it was an animated film. And then Weird Science wouldn't count because there is not one character that shows up from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Let's get started. Here is my number 11, House of Frankenstein from 1944. So this is what would be considered the second of the Universal Monster crossovers. The first was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Okay movie, but this one's better. And so this one does have an all-star cast of monsters featuring Dracula, the Wolfman, and of course, Frankenstein's monster. And it follows the story of this mad scientist. And surprisingly, the mad scientist is played by Boris Karloff. He does not play the monster in this. He has escaped from prison, and he sets out to revive all the legendary monsters. Each one of the monsters kind of have their own little subplot going on. He's revived Dracula. Wolfman is in this desperate search for his cure. And then once they introduced Frankenstein's monster a little later into it, that's when things kind of start to spiral out of control. Now, there's no need to talk about the comparisons of the novel from the book because this is a sequel after a sequel after sequel. It's just, so this one has evolved into a whole new plot line that is well past what the end of the story of Frankenstein would have been. Number 10, Curse of Frankenstein from 1957, directed by Terence Fisher. Now, Curse of Frankenstein is notable on this list because it's going to be my first Hammer movie that I'm including, and it was the first Hammer horror film ever done. It readapted the original story, the one that was created from the Universal Monster films, so it focuses more on that than it would Mary Shelley's story from the novel. Universal Studios had created this image, and they had adapted the story in a way that was very different than the original novel. So some of those iconic items or visuals that you know of, that we all love today from Frankenstein, was copyrighted. That you couldn't use them. So Hammer Films had to do something a little different. They couldn't use the iconic image of Frankenstein's monster. So Christopher Lee creates a very different looking character, and they leaned way more into the horror. This is a much scarier monster than anything that we've seen thus to this point with Frankenstein's monster. This was Hammer's first color horror movie, and it shocked audiences because it's bloody, it's got a lot of beauty, it's bold. Peter Cushing shows up as the star, and he is Victor Frankenstein, and he's intelligent, and he's arrogant, and he's a very determined fella. And of course, the plot somewhat follows the original Universal, where he builds him from the ground up. And in this, he was less of like a tragic hero and more of a product of an experiment that created a true monster. Like, he's horrific in every way. There's nothing redeemable about this monster in comparison to the Boris Karloff monster. Number 9 is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein from 1948, directed by Charles Barton. And this would be what is considered the 4th crossover. You had the two houses, House Frankenstein, House Dracula, the first one being Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And now you have Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And they did a series, I think there's about 4 of them, of Abbott and Costello meet so-and-so. And in this case, the first one, Frankenstein, because Frankenstein was the most popular of the Universal monsters at the time. This one, simply put, it follows Bud Abbott and Lou Costello as they bumble around. And I believe they worked as freight clerks, and they accidentally deliver like a crate. I can't remember if it was the wrong crate or whatnot that contained Dracula and then also Frankenstein's monster. And naturally they think like they're caught up in some sort of like prank until, of course, Dracula actually jumps up and brings the Frankenstein's monster back to life. And I believe they did this right in front of Abbott. I mean, there's chaoses and there's chases and there's tons of clever one-liners. And also Larry Talbot, reappears again as the Wolfman to warn them about the next full moon because he's going to freak out and go all wolfy on them, of course. And what one of the things that really makes this film special is you've got horror and you've got comedy. And I don't think everybody realizes how truly akin to each other comedy and horror are, because, telling a joke and scaring the shit out of somebody are one and the same thing. Both of them are a surprise. They're just done in a different tone, of course. So these blend those two. It's one of the cheapest thrills there are, but everybody loves a cheap thrill. It's almost like riding a roller coaster where it's frightful, it's fun, it's frightful, it's fun. That's what this was. It was a roller coaster of fright and fun. And the great thing about it was that they integrated them with integrity, meaning that the jokes land the way the jokes land. Nothing's changed there between Abbott and Costello, but the monsters stayed respectfully true to their legacy, where they didn't do it tongue-in-cheek whatsoever. They stayed menacing and serious and dramatic in their tone, and the two just happened to collide. Number 8 is Frankenstein Created Woman from 1967, also directed by Terence Fisher. This is another one of the Hammer films. If you've seen any of my recent Halloween videos, I talk extensively about this in both the Hammer Horror Ladies, Glamour Hammer, and then also the films of Hammer Horror. So I won't go too much into this just because it's a retread here. But this one of the 7 Hammer Frankenstein films, this one is the most unique. It's very Lovecraftian in that it does extensively go into the concept of the transference of soul, transcendental themes. And that's instead of like replacing one brain with another, like what they do in the plot of so many of the other Frankenstein movies. This one is the soul of a young man who was executed wrongly and put in the body of his girlfriend, who kills herself because her boyfriend was killed wrongfully, and goes on a killing spree of revenge. It's great. It's menacing. It's a good horror movie, and it's all around just a good movie too. Number 7 is Son of Frankenstein from 1939, directed by Roland V. Lee. One of the biggest misconceptions about some of the characters that we all know and love from Frankenstein stories is that Igor was never a character from the novel. Igor never showed up in the first movie. It was actually a character called Fritz. Nobody remembers the name Fritz, but they do remember the assistant to Dr. Frankenstein from the original movie. This is now the 3rd movie, and we're introduced to a character called Igor, who's played by Bela Lugosi, who played in the original Dracula movie, and he plays an unbelievable adaptation of this character in this movie. Now, when we get to this third film, the budget was bigger than they had ever had, and they really wanted to go over the top with the production design. Production designer Jack Otterson, he went to the next level, and he kind of went over the top with it. They always had this German expressionist architecture that they had used for these huge, lavish sets that they did. But in this one, they went bigger, and even like the furniture and like the doorways, the archways, all of these, they went like real heavy and large and bigger than life itself. And that's one of the big differences between the first two and then now this third one, Son of Frankenstein. Number 6 is Revenge of Frankenstein from 1958, also directed by Terence Fisher. All 3 of the Hammer Frankenstein movies that I've listed so far were directed by Terence Fisher. And I have this one higher up than The Curse of Frankenstein, which is the first in the series, this one being the second. I just like this one better, and this one does some things that are interesting, and I thought a bit more creative. I like the monster better in this one because he is a bit more sympathetic. And the really cool thing about this is you have a character, we've talked about Fritz and Igor and the assistant type character. This time around, his name is Carl, and he's disabled. He's got a bit of a hunchback, and he's got a limp, and he's got a disabled body, and so he helps the doctor. He goes by Dr. Stein now. He's kind of hiding. This is being the second film. He's gone to a different place, and he's hiding, but he is helping this assistant by the name of Carl, and he offers to give Carl a new body, and he's going to take the brain. And the thing that's really great about Carl is he considers Carl to be a very smart human being. He has a very desirable brain for him to put into this monster. This is kind of like, the great thing about the transition of the Hammer films is like, this is the same Dr. Frankenstein each time. So he learns from his mistakes from the previous one. So now he's doing something new. And in this case, he's like, I want to put a more desirable brain in this one that is going to make it more effective versus the bumbling boob brain that he put in the last one. Unfortunately, the body starts to decay and it doesn't fit well with this new brain. And then, he starts having these nightmares and the whole miracle of life has now collapsed into what becomes somewhat horrific because Carl is going through some experiences that are very foreign to him and he's freaking out, of course. But I consider this to be one of the better this is probably the best Hammer horror film of Frankenstein in the series. So for number 5 and number 4, I'm going to talk about these two together. And then at the end of this segment, I will tell you which one is 5 and which one is 4. The reason I'm doing it this way is because these two are the most faithful adaptations to Mary Shelley's novel. That would be Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein from 2025 that just came out this week. I will do a separate video to talk a little bit more in depth about that film. And I want to do a review on that because I did love it, but there's things that I didn't like about it, and I'd like to really dig into those. I'm going to compare this now to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1994, directed by Kenneth Branagh, and also starring Kenneth Branagh. Branagh's version of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to this point was the most faithful. There was a TV movie from the early 70s called Frankenstein, The True Story. That one was really one of the only adaptations that was close to it. This one really took it to almost perfection with making almost every little plot point and every character to be spot on from Mary Shelley's original novel. The only real difference was that the bride of Frankenstein, the character that was Elizabeth, who was in the movie murdered by Frankenstein's monster, and then was asked for Victor to create a bride to the monster. That never really happened. So in the novel, Frankenstein's monster asks for a bride, and Victor begins making her. But he can't do it. He's already has too much guilt built up from, this crime to humanity that he's already created, and he can't go through with it. So the monster goes and kills his fiancee, Elizabeth. So, that's the slight difference. In the movie, they kind of use that. And I actually think that they made a clever change to the original story by making that dynamic of where he kills his fiance and then gives him a reason in the plot to go through with creating the bride to the monster. Because he clearly now has the scepter or the keys to life. So he feels that, his fiance who's taken away from him, he can now revive her. And he attempts to do that with the oversight that the monster is now going to take her away from him. That really is the biggest change from the novel to the film. Brenna's version is wildly Shakespearean. I mean, if you like Shakespeare and you like that type of linguistics, you're going to love this. I love that. And I love how it's not over the top, but it is big and bold. The scenery and the music and the sets, it's all drawn out, and I love that aspect of it. It is one of the things that is very strong about this film. It's actually not that renowned as far as, its popularity in the Frankenstein mythology. So I believe this to be underrated. I rate it much higher than most people. I think it's excellently executed. I believe the love interest of Elizabeth, played by Helena Bonham Carter, to be the best portrayal of any of the portrayals in all of them. Not to say that she's the best bride, because when you get to the bride, that's when, like, the Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, that's the best version. I think the only weak point of this movie, and it's not that weak, but it's what everyone complains about, is that Robert De Niro's Frankenstein's monster is not what everyone wanted. I mean, he's definitely grotesque, and he gives you a level of discomfort when watching him, because he looks like he's definitely a Frankenstein's monster that's made up of all these parts, and he walks and moves like he has different people's parts, and that the joints don't fit together perfectly. But this version digs deeper into the feeling of being wronged and revenge towards his creator. And that is played much stronger, and Robert De Niro is actually perfect for that. So I don't have a problem with his portrayal of the monster in this. However, when you compare it to Del Toro's 2025 version, Jacob Elordi is stunning, like absolutely stunning. So when you compare the two pieces together, 2025 versus 1994, I do like the Frankenstein from 2025's version much better, but it hits a different character completely. One is peaceful, one is vengeful, so they both hit their marks, and they have a different arc too. So Robert De Niro's version of the character from the novel to the film follows it more accurately, and that's what I do love about that one. Versus the other one is like it's improved upon. In fact, I believe that, and this is just my opinion, I have not read or heard this anywhere, but it's probably going to come up at some point. If you look back on the 1983 graphic novel by Bernie Wrightson depicting Frankenstein, and that was, a lifelong interest of his, was the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Those images from his graphic novel appear to be an influence on what Guillermo del Toro ended up producing in his 2025 version. The only difference is Bernie Wrightson's versions, his face is a little more grotesque. It's cadaverous. It's got no actual nose. And then Del Toro's version is quite elegant and beautiful. For the most part, if you can look past, the color of his skin and the lines, and he almost seems for a bit as a newly born deer as he tries to walk, because he does have a stride to him that's graceful, yet he's still learning to stride. Now, one of the downfalls to the 2025 version that I don't like as much is Victor Frankenstein is not redeemable so much. And I do love Oscar Isaac's portrayal of him. He's fantastic. The way he was written, he nailed it. He did it perfectly. He's just not so much a brilliant scientist, doctor, as he is an artist entrepreneur. Yeah, he's brilliant. He has no ethics, so to speak, with the respect to this abomination that he's created. And, that theme rides tried and true through all of the other Victor Frankensteins. It's just this one, didn't really have... I mean, he does have an arc at the end. He does forgive him or whatnot, but it's not the same as the others that have kind of learned their lessons, so to speak, with the exception of Peter Cushing's, who was like a diabolical evil bastard, which that might be my favorite one, by the way. But I'm getting off track here. But the biggest thing for me with respect to Brenna's version is the perfect depiction of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And Guillermo del Toro's version really asks you to dig into more deeper questions. Guillermo del Toro is very Catholic, so he had a lot of Catholicism in his theme throughout, which sometimes was a nice touch, and sometimes it was just a bit too much. Versus the other ones, there's more of a Greek mythology to it. And the name of the book is The Modern Day Prometheus. The level of beauty that is depicted in Guillermo del Toro's is on the next level. It really is. I mean, the sets are so grand and the architecture is so beautiful. Even when it's grotesque, it's beautiful. It has, a bit of a fairy tale to it that Brenna's version does not. Brenna's version is a lot more Victorian, and Brenna's version has more of realism in the period piece that he's trying to create, versus the other one is, next level fantasy, but not unrealistic, I'll add. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go a little bit more in depth. So check out my next video, which will cover a review, and I'm going to talk more in depth about the 2025 Frankenstein. This one, I'm going to cut that a little bit short. I'm going to give you kind of my 5 and 4 on this. I'm calling Frankenstein 2025 number 5, and I believe Kenneth Branagh's 1994 Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to be still the more faithful, the better film. Still, so, 4 or 5, but these were close. Time might go by and I might flip these two, to be fair. But, that's where I'm holding them now. Number 3, the original, the one that started it all, Frankenstein from 1931, directed by James Whale. And this one introduced us to the magnificent Boris Karloff. This was a breakout role for him. He had done plenty of acting. He comes from a theater background, so he has extensive thespian skills to this point. And if you're familiar with Boris Karloff over the years, he has proven himself over and over and over again as a phenomenal actor. And the image that they created, or Boris Karloff was participating in creating, was the iconic Frankenstein that everybody knows today. It's stuck. It's the one that we all know. It's very different from Mary Shelley's novel, as described in her novel. But you have the iconic flat-topped monster. You have like the blueprint of the bolts coming out of his neck. And the story centers around Dr. Henry Frankenstein. He's not Victor. They made a change. I don't know why, but they did. He goes by Henry Frankenstein. He's brilliant. He's obsessed, and he's convinced that he can create life from death. This film it's tight, it's 1931, so like it's got the essentials from start to beginning, and it's missing some of the intricacies of the novel, of course. He has, like I said before, he has his assistant Fritz, who steals corpses for him and assembles a man. And then, they use the whole laboratory for the lightning strike. Oh, and by the way, a cool tidbit about this is some of the equipment that they used was actually equipment they got from Nikola Tesla. So they wanted it to look inventive and cutting edge technology for its time, of course. And the creature they create, he's confused and terrified, and he lashes out at the world. And this is where you have like the villagers coming after him with the pitchforks and the torches. And like that image originates here. And it's heartbreaking too, because Boris Karloff found a way for you to be highly sympathetic of this. He's like a big teddy bear. And so you as the viewer, you don't feel the same way as the villagers. You're seeing it through the eyes of this abused monster. Number 2 is The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, also directed by James Wales. The successor to Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, was always thought to be the better of the two, mostly because they had a bigger budget by then. They took it to the next level. But some of the visuals that they had in this, the cinematography is spectacular. If I were to show you, a bunch of different shots from one of these two movies, you would probably think a lot of them came from the first one, but a lot of the iconic shots and scenes that we know from the original Universal Monster Frankenstein movies came from The Bride of Frankenstein. And then there's, of course, the bride itself, who doesn't show up until really right near the very end of the movie. I mean, that is such an iconic shot that everybody loves. This one picks up right where the first one from 1931 left off. And of course, they do explain that the monster survived the burning windmill. But enter Dr. Pretorius. And he's this really interesting mad scientist character who convinces Henry Frankenstein to help him create a mate for the monster. So like I mentioned before in the book, there's all these reasons that they created the monster. The fiance was killed. She wasn't killed. It depends on the adaptation that you're looking at. But in this one, this Dr. Pretorius just comes along and is like, I think we should create a bride for your monster. We'll build it from the parts of dead broads that we dig out of the grave. Perfect. And so Henry does struggle with this. He struggles between love and science and fear, and the monster grows more and more human. And that's one of the great things about this one over the first one is Boris Karloff's monster is evolving. He's learning to speak more. He talks way more in this one than he does in the first one. He's starting to understand things. And when the bride finally does come at the end, he is all excited, is like, you got me a girlfriend for my birthday? Awesome, man. And then, of course, you have that iconic look of the bride that they created. It's because they never completed the bride in the novel. There's no ever description of her. She's just, an unmade monster that didn't get created. But in this, they create this icon that actually is, it's fair to say this is the seed to so many of the iconic Elvira type characters that came on. You have Lily from the Munsters. You've got Vampirilla, who Elvira was mostly fashioned after was Mela Normie, who did kind of the campy Vampira TV intros. And you also got to remember, this does have a lot of the iconic scenes that we all know and love. It does have the blind man that he finally does go and have the conversation with. It really did give them a chance to fill in some of the major pieces from the novel that weren't in the first movie. This one, I do believe, has greater cinematography. It has richer visuals. He's even more sympathetic here. And it has the look of it is definitely more of like a fairy tale look. The other one was too, but this one brings it to the next phase. I would say Henry Frankenstein is more sympathetic this time around than he was the first time. The first time around, he's just a mad scientist. Now he's learned the error of his ways. And Dr. Pretorius is introduced, and he's just fiendish and maniacal, and he's really a great character. Unfortunately, we didn't see much of him ever again after Bride of Frankenstein. And for me, number 1 is Mel Brooks' 1974 Young Frankenstein. It captures the scary, spooky essence of those 3 original films, as well as elevates it to another level with the comedy. And I get that this one is heavily comedic, but all of the elements, if you just take away the comedy of this, This one is the most solid film of all of them, incorporating so many of the key iconic aspects of Frankenstein's monster, the characters, the scenery, Transylvania, all of it. And if you're thinking this one doesn't count, it's like, no. This is a sequel to, let's just say, Son of Frankenstein, because this is the grandson of Frankenstein, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, he's calling himself now.
I have one question, Dr. Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
He's very specific about the correction in that. And then, of course, Igor, he does the same thing. He's introduced him, and he's like, it's pronounced Igor. So, they're playing that whole routine out.
You must be Igor.
No, it's pronounced Igor.
This, for 1974, this is genuinely a hilarious movie. I put it up there with one of the greatest comedies of all times, but I also put it up there as in one of the greatest films of all times. And in this case, Dr. Frankenstein has inherited his grandfather's castle. He goes back there, he finds his old ledgers, and everything starts to kind of just be the same thing all over again. And they do hit those same beats that they did from the original and The Bride of Frankenstein, of course. Interestingly, though, Mel Brooks was insistent. It's funny. He goes to the studio to pitch this movie, and they just assumed it was going to be in color because all the Hammer movies that were coming out at the same time were like, oh, they got these big colors, and they were so successful. And he was dead set on this needs to have the same core feel as the original. It needs to be black and white. There was a battle over that for quite some time. He did win that battle. It worked out so perfectly. He even got to go back and use the exact same sets from the original films to make his movie. And of course, the most important ingredient in this one for me is Marty Feldman. Marty Feldman is, it's just bizarre for a guy. There's people that are just downright hilarious. You got your Will Ferrells, you got your Jim Carreys. Marty Feldman could say nothing. If he just were to look at you, he's hilarious. And sadly, he's hilarious looking. I guess that's what I'm getting at. But I've never seen him do anything and me not go, wow, that's funny. Yellowbeard's always one of my favorites with him, but there's just, you can quote so many different scenes from this movie that were Marty Feldman's line. They're just going to knock you off your feet. And, I don't want to leave out Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder wrote this script with Mel Brooks. They did this as a collaboration together. He is one of the finest actors to ever grace the silver screen in this case. He's just so heartwarming. I remember when he passed, it was one of the more upsetting of the celebrity passings in my lifetime. I can't imagine not loving him if you knew him. He just seems like such a warm individual, and it comes off in all of his films. This, and then Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the two of them are kind of the pinnacle of his career, and they're incomparable, easily incomparable. I want to thank you for watching all the way to the end. I hope, a lot of these were, no big surprise. Maybe my number one was a big surprise to you, maybe not, I don't know, but a lot of the ones at the top of the list, if you compare it to some of the other lists, they're on there. So I'd love to hear ones that I completely forgot about. And you're like, oh, why didn't you include that one? Please put it in the comments. I'm Foxy Sellers. Click the like, click subscribe. You'll get keyed into more videos just like this. Thanks for watching.